Purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. And what that it means is that, normally we don't take on, life-altering endeavors until we have something happen to us and something gets personal.
Jeff Johnston has experienced compound loss. First, his 23-year-old son to fentanyl poisoning in 2016, and now, most recently, his wife of 21 years to addiction. But Jeff is living undeterred by loss, doing what he can to change the narrative in this country when it comes to mental health, overdose, and addiction. Jeff is launching the Living Undeterred tour this spring, where he hopes to raise awareness and bring people together, all working toward a common goal. Emily's Hope has joined forces as the South Dakota partner for the cross-country tour. Jeff has written a book, This One's for You. He also writes a blog and hosts the Living Undeterred podcast. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for joining me today. I was so grateful that you reached out to me to tell me about your Living Undeterred tour. And then I just learning a little bit more like you, I instantly felt this connection with you.
Yeah, Angela, it's great to be on the show and talk to your followers and your listeners about, unfortunately, you and I are, members of a club that we didn't ask to join, and certainly one we can never leave. And there's a lot of similarities between you and I in a lot of ways. And I think we're going to navigate through a lot of these different things and how we're coping with survival and even more, and also helping other people deal with these things. And unfortunately, I'd like to say, and I'm sure you would agree, that the numbers look favorable to get better, but they don't. They certainly don't.
I know that was my biggest goal in embarking on this journey, was to try to prevent this from happening to other families. You and I know how devastating it is. And it's like a bomb being dropped in the middle of your family. And unfortunately, we've just seen overdose numbers skyrocket during the pandemic. 100,000 people died of overdose in 2020. Mm-hmm. It's like 274 people every day. Mm-hmm. And it's frustrating because I feel like I'm out shouting from the rooftops. I'm sure you feel the same way, yet the issue continues.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because, you and I are specifically drawn to the opioid poisoning, we call it now. And I see the media is really making a good effort in taking the word overdose off the table, because that's what it is. It's a murder. It's poisoning. Certainly, Emily and Seth didn't plan to die the day that they did. Going back to what's happening with the emphasis on the opioid epidemic, but I do think there's a bigger issue here, and I think you would agree, is that this is a national, it's a global, it's a human mental health challenge. It's an issue, and if you think of the opioid overdose, I just said poisoning, and then I just said overdose. It's going to take a while for me to get that verbiage out of my vocabulary, but you look at the emphasis on opioids, and we kind of tend to maybe forget about some of the other issues that are out there, like the 95,000 people a year die from alcoholism. The 1 in 4, I think, women and 1 in 6 boys that are sexually molested. The suicidal ideation, the depression, all the stuff that's out there that is on top of the opioid epidemic. And it's like, where do we go wrong as a society? I mean, we are such an abundant society. We have everything at our fingertips, yet we're missing something. We're trying to fill gaps and voids in our lives with drugs and alcohol. And I don't know. I'm not saying it's nihilistic in a way, but it certainly is not. It's not something to get excited about. And I think you and I are out there being vulnerable, telling our story. And sometimes I wonder if it's making a difference. And I know it is, but I'm too impatient like you. I want to see the numbers start getting better today,
And I know in individuals that you and I have both made a difference in telling our stories and in trying to help other people. And I always say also, as much as I want to help everybody and just put an end to this epidemic, I really know that if just one life is saved, then we will have done the right thing. Tell me about Seth. I really want to hear about Seth. He was 23 years old.
Yeah, Seth's journey started at 16, actually at 15, Angela, when he was prescribed Strattera for hyperactivity, which is insane. I mean, I was as hyper as any kid out there. And I have attention deficit. I took the last D off because it's not a disorder. It can be a superpower if harnessed the correct way. So I don't even call it ADD anymore. It's attention deficit. But at fifth grade, somehow my wife and I went in and we were having issues with his attention, or the teachers were making comments. And so he took Strattera, which I think at the time wasn't FDA approved, similar to like Adderall, but it was given to fifth and sixth graders. And then at 16, he was actually given Adderall. And that's really where we started seeing problems. And at that point, Seth was going through a lot of experimental stages, like a lot of adolescents do. They were trying alcohol, like I did, and I never did drugs, so I can't understand from that perspective. But I've been around it in other ways. But so he started experimenting with marijuana. Played guitar. I coached him in basketball. He was a tremendous basketball player. Coached him for a lot of years, just like every kid out there, just like with Emily, just lots of upside, lots of potential, but they had their adolescent challenges like we all did. And, he found solace in escaping with drugs and alcohol. And so it went from, innocent, beers at a football game to getting drunk, 5 nights a week. And then the marijuana thing, it's legal in half the country, Dad. It's no big deal. Everyone's doing it. It's like, well, doesn't mean you have to do it just because something's legal. I mean, that's the insanity of this stuff. I don't care if heroin was legal, I still wouldn't do it. I mean, and I think we need to understand that some of these drugs possibly will be legal down the road, and we need to embrace this with our kids. But going back to Seth, so he was given Adderall and then experimented with marijuana, and his drinking got really bad. And then cocaine was introduced, and then he actually was incarcerated. He was in prison. He was incarcerated a number of times, drunk drivings and things like that, breaking and entering. And then he got into a fight with somebody and stabbed somebody and went to prison. And I thought, like a lot of parents, and Angela, I'm sure you had this with Emily's, like, maybe this is rock bottom. Maybe this is what everyone talked about. Maybe this is he walks out of there and the clouds part and the lights come down, and all of a sudden he's like, I'm a new man. And, I saw him regularly in prison, and I was one of the only ones that went down there. Most of his friends just disappeared. But he got out, and within 2 months, he was dead within 2 months. I found a way, and I write about this in my book, and I know it's similar to what you've talked about. I found a way to become a better man, a better person, not a bitter person. And I think there's a story in everything. There's something there's an opportunity in every worst case scenario for us. I mean, there has to be. What other choice is there? And unfortunately, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but unfortunately, my wife and I, at the time Seth died, we immediately went downhill. We drank. I mean, we both tried to pretty much drink ourselves to death. I was a functional alcoholic for 30 something years.
And that's not that unusual, Jeff, that people who experience horrible trauma turn to substances themselves. I mean, that is a fairly typical scenario.
Yeah, I really didn't know how to handle it. And I really was worried about my other two boys at the time. Ian was 14 and Roman was 12 when Seth died, their older brother. And my wife and I just, I think I just shut myself in the house for 6 months. And my wife and I just, played this massive pity party every day and listened to sad music. And I just didn't see a way out of it. And this time I was 52 years old at this time. And so I made a decision on December 24th, 2017. Like a lot of people, that was kind of the day where I had my epiphany, Angela. And I said, I'm done. Tired of being tired. I'm tired of excuses. I'm tired of living depressed. I'm tired of being miserable. And I just quit drinking. And to be honest with you, it's been the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. I haven't had a drink. I don't think about it. I don't count. I don't keep score. I've kind of tricked my brain to play different narratives that normal alcoholics deal with, and my wife, unfortunately, dealt with grief a different way. And she died June 29th of last year. We're married 21 years and she was 46 years old. So, I've lost a son and a wife in the last 5 years. And my wife was a freaking rock star. She was just super mom. She was beautiful. She was vibrant. She was, what you read about everybody who walks into a room and lights the room up. But grief, for some people, the mountain of grief is just too tall to climb. And I don't know how to talk about my wife without sounding like I'm throwing her under the bus, but I think for me to change a narrative and to make people realize that drinking is not the solution to your trauma, I have to bring it up and be a little bit careful about some of the personal stuff. But the bottom line is that I've lost 2 people of this crap. And between you and I, we've lost a lot. And I think you said, what is it, 280 people a day?
274, yes.
Are getting that call, and just in Iowa, the opioid I'm from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, so I'm not far from you, but the opioid overdoses are up 35% from last year, just that. I think of alcoholism and all these other issues. And it's like, so here we are, you and I do podcasts, you and I talk to people. And I think it's a combination of, we do want to give back, but I think we're also trying to help ourselves, Angela. I mean, I know I benefit a lot talking to people like you. It makes me get my days better.
Well, first of all, Jeff, I want to tell you how sorry I am for the loss of your son and the loss of your wife. I wrote a blog called Collateral Damage, and I really believe that, it's like a ripple effect in a pond when a stone gets thrown in. Mm-hmm. If you think of the overdose death or the poisoning death. And you just don't know what the fallout is going to be. I had a friend, part of this club, as you said, nobody wants to join and nobody can leave, who completed suicide just a year ago. And our children had died at the same time of overdose. And, she left behind a husband and a granddaughter she was raising. And I just think people need to understand that when this happens, it's not just like, oh, that person's gone and everybody just goes on, because not everybody can. Right. I mean, I admire you. I admire everything you're doing. I think there's an inner strength. I went through a lot of adversity as a child, and I don't know if that's where my inner strength comes from. But not everybody is the same, and not everyone can find that, to carry on. And I feel so bad for people like your wife, people like my friend. I mean, and then here you are left holding the bag, so to speak. You've got to carry on. And I agree with you. Like, I think helping others helps me more than anything else that I can do. Finding purpose in the pain. I always say that finding purpose in the pain is my jam. That's what I do. That's why I do the podcast. That's why I write the blogs. That's why I run a charity. But it doesn't mean it's not hard. It doesn't mean that you don't have your moments. And I thank you. I mean, I just want to thank you for everything you're doing, and say I admire how well you're doing today, even though the loss of your wife was not that long ago.
Yeah, it was just 7 months ago, but because I saw her go downhill so fast for 3 years, I've had a little bit of preconditioning for this event happening. But what I've learned from this is purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. That's like my big quote that I actually have our new t-shirts in, and that's my quote on the back. Purpose becomes passion when it gets personal. And what that it means is that, normally we don't take on, life-altering endeavors until we have something happen to us and something gets personal, like Alzheimer's to your parents. And all of a sudden now you're an Alzheimer's advocate, or your wife gets breast cancer. Now you're like raising money for breast cancer awareness. And that's kind of how it works. That's how we can't, save everybody and get involved in every project. But in my case, I've had substance abuse, and be honest with you, it's probably a mental illness issue with my wife and my son that ultimately led to them trying to fill those gaps. But, I write a lot about in my book, this one's for you, an inspirational journey through addiction, death, and meaning, which I'll send you out a copy, and they're available on all the platforms. And then I also just completed the audiobook too, which is in my voice. I thought it was very important. Yeah, it was tough. It took me about 3 or 4 months because there was times I actually had to leave the studio because I hadn't read the book in over a year. And I wanted to be honest and authentic with my passion. I didn't want to just read it to read it. So when I felt like I wasn't in it, I just left the studio.
And I want to let people know that we will put in the show notes to your website and links to your book and your podcast and everything else as well.
But Angela, there's a moment in the book that I think is the pivot moment. That's kind of where everything in my life since then has really took form. Even my nonprofit is called the Choices Network. And it's not about sober living and clean living and don't do drugs. It's about choices. It's about, choices precede consequences. So if you want to stay out of jail, you got to make the choices not to get there. If you don't want to get drunk driving, you got to make the choices not to get there. So there's a part in the book. Do I have a few minutes to share this story real
Of
quickly
course,
for you?
please do.
This is an important story because when Seth died, it was the day of districts for my middle son, who's a college golfer. Actually, he's at University of South Dakota. He's a Coyote. So we're big Coyotes over here. So
That's awesome. Well, actually, and I worked in Cedar Rapids for my first job at KGAN TV. So we have these connections.
We do. So go Yotes. So my son was getting ready to golf, and I was taking my son to the school here to drop him off. He was a sophomore in high school, and my wife was getting ready back at home. And then that morning, I was taking the clubs out of the back of the bag or the back of the car, and the phone rang, and I picked it up, and that's when I was told they found Seth in a hotel room in his chair, slumped over, tourniquet laying on the bed, with his belt, and he was dead from a heroin overdose. And from there, everything goes so fast. I'm sure you can recall the moment in time, when you got that call or how you found out. It's like frozen. It's like fossilized in your soul, And I remember thinking to myself, how am I going to present this? It was hard enough to go home and tell my wife. I was just, it's just indescribable. And then I thought, well, how am I going to tell Seth's little brothers, that just admired his big brother, looked up to him? How am I going to tell him my brother's dead? So I called my dad. My dad's a doctor. And he said, Jeff, I got two things to tell you. Tell him the truth and then shut your mouth. And my dad's delivered many bad news to many people about death, being a doctor. And I said, okay. So I got there, and they came off the bus, and they were all excited about, their day. And I sat them down and said, boys, I got some really bad news for you. And I said, your brother's dead. And just like my dad said, I just stopped talking. I want to be Dr. Phil. I want to solve everything. I want to just talk. I stopped. And my middle son looked up and said, how'd he die, Dad? Drugs? I said, yeah, drugs. And then I'd say, what, Angela, something happened. I don't know where this came from. And those people that are overly religious will subscribe it to that. And I'm fine, because I don't know where it came from. But something popped in my head, and I stood up and I said, boys, and this is a chapter in my book called The Two Roads. I said, boys, we have two roads to go down. We have one road of despair and, misery, and we'll become alcoholics and addicts ourselves, or we have a road of inspiration and motivation where we can change our lives and the lives of the people. Road. I ask you to join me. And I sat back down. And what I thought at the moment, why that was powerful, was that I wasn't going to tell the boys how to grieve. I was going to show them how to grieve. Now, I didn't for the first year. I drank myself to death, literally. So I didn't practice what I preached, but ultimately I got out of that through different things I write about, my meditation, the podcast, the book, all these things got me out of it. But I go back and I told that little bit lengthy story, Angela, because it's important that we all have pivot points in our life. We all have moments where we're going to choose the better road or the bitter road. And that's been kind of my thing that's keeping me going now, is that, this living undeterred mindset project that I've embarked on is this better, not bitter philosophy, the two roads pivot story. We all have it. You had it. You could easily have drank yourself to death. You could have, numbed your pain in different ways, but you didn't. Matter of fact, I reached out to you. I think I told you this in 2018, a few months after Emily had died. I think I reached out to you in August. So I saw you on social media, and I was 2 years into this, and you were 3 or 4 months into it. How much further you were ahead than I was. And I'm like, this is a, I looked up to you. You were a mentor. I'm like, there's another person. There's another Steve Grant out there. There's another person out there. What the hell am I doing sitting around drinking myself to death? So people like you have been an inspiration to me, and I hope to pay that forward. And people hear my story, they can say, well, I still got two of my boys left, and my wife's still around. Who am I to sit around, And
Right.
so there's always a way to look at things differently.
Well, thank you for those kind words, Steve. I go back to those early days, after Emily died. I took 3 months off of work. I always say I had to pick myself up off the floor. But then I realized I had this platform, and I could either run and hide from the truth. And that's why when you talk about what happened with your wife, I think it's so important that we speak the truth. And as a journalist, the truth is so important to me, sometimes hard to get to, but I knew I had this platform, and I thought I can either tell the truth and tell my story. And I've asked so many people over the years after horrible tragedies to talk to me and to tell me their story in hopes of helping others. And I thought, how could I not? How could I not?
Exactly.
And so that is kind of what propelled me early on in the beginning. And I wanted to own our family story, Emily's story, my story as part of that. I didn't want someone else telling it. I didn't want gossip and rumors. And I wanted to help people. And that was what pushed me forward to do that. So even though I look back and I think about those early stages, the stages of grief are not really accurate, but you know what I mean?
Not.
The first, you're just in shock and half the stuff you do, I don't know that you're making very good decisions early on, but I go back and I want to tell my old self there, thank you for doing that. Because I believe that there are moments in our lives that we could never predict that take us to moments that we could never have imagined, right? So here you and I are right now. Neither one of us could ever have imagined that we'd be meeting each other and doing this podcast, all because of the incredibly painful moments that we could never have imagined.
Yeah, I like the way you said that. I've got another quote. I have lots of quotes, but one is, pain is unavoidable, but suffering is a choice. Yeah. And I actually got that kind of out of Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, which is, I think should be required reading for every human on the planet, about his times in Auschwitz and the concentration camps, about how he kind of he got a positive attitude and that changed everything in his outlook, and focused on what he could control, like the Stoics talk about, focus on things you could control and not spend time on the things you can't control. And so this pain is unavoidable, suffering is a choice. Viktor Frankl said, suffering is my opportunity. That was the quote that he said in the book. That was my aha moment. I'm like, okay, death was presented to me as an opportunity to be a better man. It wasn't a punishment. It wasn't somebody taken from me. Instead of addition by subtraction, it was addition by addition. It was, my life got better because of what happened to me. Now, someone out there could say, well, Jeff, I don't know how you could think that way. Well, I don't know other way you can think. I mean, I don't know how you can, I don't know. I joke a lot about this, Angela, and anyone listening, I don't mean to be offensive, but I joke that I tried depression a few times. I didn't like it, so I quit. And it went, and that's just how I think type A people are. It's like, I don't like being down. I don't like being miserable. If I have to trick my brain and do things that are traditional, more and a little bit unique to me, it gets me through the day. And I'm 55. I want to live to be 120, and I want to live good. I want to be evolving each day, shedding my skin, becoming a better human being. I don't want to be sitting around just trying to survive. I don't think you do either. I mean, just by watching what you do, there's no way you're in survival mode. I mean, you have survival moments, but you've evolved out of that, and you're just doing amazing things. And I really admire what you're doing, and everybody in this. And one thing, can I throw out real quick? One thing I've noticed, and you and I were talking before we went on this, before we taped, this is like a female dominated area I'm in. I'm in all these chat rooms. I'm in all these Facebook, fentanyl, whatever. And there's not a lot of men. And I don't know where the men go in these situations. And it's mostly, moms that are really passionate about out there doing these things. But, Steve Grant and a few other men that I've really run into that are doing great things about this. Tim Ryan's another one I met. He lost his son too. But this is, I would say, is like a 75% female dominated space. I'm just challenging the dads. Where are you? You're no less a dad because they're not here, right?
I have some theories about this. Well, first I wanted to say Viktor Frankl is one of my favorite books as well. And I read it after Emily died. And he talks about, it's all about how we frame things in our mind. Mm-hmm. It's all about how we think about things. And everybody, like you said, should read that book, whether you've had a catastrophic loss or not. It really puts things in perspective, but also the dominance of women talking about overdose and fentanyl poisoning and all of these things and loss. I think it's because as women, we've always been encouraged to talk about our emotions, show our emotions, talk about our feelings. And really, men are supposed to be stoic and, not be vulnerable. And that is one thing I heard you on your podcast talking about vulnerability. We all know Brene Brown has, brought this to the forefront of our minds as a culture. Yeah. But I often wonder, even when I'm very raw in my blogs, it helps me just to get it all out there, to write what I'm feeling. And I often wonder, am I being too vulnerable? But you as a guy, I'm sure even, the pressure is even more on you to maybe not be as vulnerable.
Yeah, I wrote a blog called My Addiction to Vulnerability. And it was precisely what you just said, because I started getting so consumed with telling my story. And this became a me narrative, not a we narrative. And so one thing I'm really been working on, especially with the tour, which I'd like to spend some time before we end this podcast, is talking about the tour. But I wanted the tour to be a we story type emphasis. And I've learned through vulnerability that it takes me, I'm sure you run into this every day. The other day I was in an elevator and I was wearing a Living Undeterred shirt. The guy goes, "What's that Living Undeterred shirt?" And I say, "Well, my son died, my wife died, blah, blah, blah," like within 30 seconds. And I could see the guy wanting to tell me his story, but then the doors opened and his floor was there and he had to leave. And I thought, this is what the tour is all about. I want to get that guy in a room and talk to him for 2 hours about what he was going to tell me, because everywhere I go, I crack that door by telling first what happens to me, and people feel that it's okay. It's like a safe space. And so that's what this tour is all about, is I want to get people talking about this. I don't want to run around telling my story about Seth and my wife, every single moment of every day. That's not what this is about. And I think you probably reach a point where vulnerability can be a little bit, challenging in that you're not, too vulnerable. At some point people do want to move on, with talking about different things.
Right. And I always say that when it comes to the death of our children and your wife, you'll never move on, but you can move forward. Yeah. But we'll always kind of carry that with us. I always say, I'll carry this grief with me. I've learned to really incorporate it in my life in the best way that I can. And I think that's important for people to understand too. But let's talk about the tour, because you mentioned you reached out to me in 2018, and that was after I was on a lot of national media, and I was flooded with emails and phone calls, and I tried to answer as many as I could. And sometimes they were short answers. I did go back and find the email that you sent me after you contacted. I'm like, yeah, he did. And I was like, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I didn't really expand. And I apologize for that. I was so overwhelmed at the time.
No.
But now you reached back out to me to talk to me about the Living Undeterred tour. Can you explain to our listeners what that is?
Yeah. And the story was, I was on my elliptical running back in May of last year. And I got off my elliptical and I jumped on Twitter, and I saw this guy riding across the state that he lived in, raising money for his wife's breast cancer awareness. And, I have imposter syndrome. I'm competitive, like everybody. I thought, well, I can do that too, and I thought, well, I was too small and I don't want to ride a bike. So I stayed up till 3 a.m. and I designed this plan where I was going to go up to Camping World in Waterloo, Iowa the next day. And I was going to buy an RV and I want to drive around the United States and raise $1 million. Now, am I insane? I have no idea. I had like 5,000 in my nonprofit at the time. So 5,000 to $1 million is a pretty big jump. And I thought, but if I don't buy the RV and I don't make myself accountable, I'm not going to do this. It's that crazy of a hairy, audacious goal that I won't do it. And so I did. I went up to Camping World. I brought up my little presentation. I sold them on this idea. And sure enough, they gave me a really good deal on a 35-foot RV. So then I've never even been in an RV. I've never been in one. So now I'm like, hey, what the hell am I going to do now? And then I told one of my great friends, Antarctic Mike, and you'll have to meet him. He's part of our tour. And he goes by Mike Pierce, but his thing's Antarctic Mike. And I told Molly, I said, and my thing was, Angela, I was going to do this in July. So I bought the RV in May. I was going to drive around the country like 2 months later. And Molly's quote was, "Jeff, I will kill you if you do this in 2 months." And then Mike's like, "No, Jeff, you got to slow down. This is a great idea, but you got to be intentional. You have to do this with a purpose, So I said, okay. So I put that on the back burner and we moved it to now it's May 9th of this year. So I'm only 90 days out now. And that's when I reached out to you because, well, here's the idea of the tour. It's called the Living Undeterred US Tour, changing the narrative on mental health, substance abuse, and addiction. That's the objective. And what I'm going to do is on May 7th, I'm leaving Cedar Rapids. I'm going to Des Moines. and you are my actual first stop. South Dakota is our first state on the tour.
It's fantastic.
The tour is over 3 stages. I'm doing about 16 days nonstop, coming back for about 2 weeks. My son has high school graduation, and I'm going on a fishing trip with my 2 boys that I cannot miss for anything. I'm going back on the tour, doing the whole East Coast for like 3 weeks, come back for another 8 days, revamp, and then we do the whole South. So it's 95 to 100 days. We're going to every single state. And what we've done is, Angela was going to do the opioid awareness tour, but in talking to people, they're like, no, Jeff, you need to think bigger than just your story. So that's why this is a mental health initiative. And now if you look at mental health is one of the biggest Google names on the internet right now. And really that's what Emily had, Seth had, and Prudence had. They had mental health issues that they went the drugs and alcohol to mask it. Right.
So mental health and addiction go hand in hand, and people are usually self-medicating in some way. I always say that Emily was a sensitive soul dealing with a broken world. And so pain and even love, I mean, sometimes all of it is just too much for sensitive people.
Well, she was an artist. That shows her sensitivity. Most artists are very connected to nature and stuff like that.
Right. And I just think that drugs and alcohol can be effective until they're not, right? Yeah, I mean, they can be effective until they aren't anymore. And then they're very painful. And it's just heading down a road that people shouldn't go on, because ultimately it leads to death. But so you contacted me, and I know you said South Dakota is going to be your first stop. You're going to go to 16 states. What do you want to accomplish at each stop of the Living Undeterred tour?
That's a great question. We have the tour broken into 2 types of participants. There's our state partners, and that's what you'll be kind of helping me identify. The state partners are going to be, and because I can't go to 8 different stops in each state, we're only picking 1 stop per state. So, your relationship and our stop will be our only one in South Dakota. And some other states like California and Florida, we're going to do 2 stops. But what the goal is we're going to pull up in the RV. It's going to be fully wrapped, Living Undeterred US tour. The state partners are going to be responsible for providing a venue. So I got to have a place to park the RV. We're going to do presentations, so you and I can speak together about our story. We both have our own nonprofits that we can promote and talk about. And then we want to do a panel discussion where we want to have you and I and maybe some other maybe some clinicians on that side of the fence can talk about mental health, substance abuse, and addiction, kind of like a town hall concept. That's kind of my thought. And then I just go on to the next state, and we do this for 95 days. And I want to raise $1 million. And what the goal is, Angela, is half of the money I want to give back to the 50 or 60 state partners. And the other half is going into my nonprofit, the Choices Network. And that's to help adolescents make better choices with drugs and alcohol. So that's the state partners. And we're still looking. We have like 24 states or 25 states still open. So people who want to get involved, that follow you, I know we're looking at North Dakota, we're looking at Nebraska, Wyoming, Utah. So there's some states over by South Dakota that if you know of anybody in the mental health, substance abuse, or addiction space, I'd be happy to hook them up with our 2 staff people that we have working on the tour. Then the other part of the tour is where the money is, and that's the sponsors. Those are the tour sponsors. That's corporate America. People that want their name on the RV. I mean, we're going for 95 days around the United States. Think of the millions and millions of eyeballs are going to see that wrap on that RV. And so there is definitely an advantage for sponsors to get involved in this. For anybody that caters to sober living, clean lifestyles, exercise people, mindfulness, things like that, we want to try to bring to the forefront. So I made a comment the other day. Someone said, well, Jeff, when you're out preaching to everybody about what you did, and I said, hold on, I'm not preaching. This is an exploration. This is not a presentation. I got more questions than I do answers. I'm just a dad from Iowa in an RV with my 2 boys and a guy that, ran 2 marathons on Antarctica. And I'm going to go around, I'm going to try to find questions to these answers. And then at the end of the tour, we're going to have resources available for people to get more help.
Yeah, I wanted to know ultimately what your objective is. Raising awareness, of course, stopping stigma. I mean, I think we're just heading down that road, and I really hopefully saving lives. I mean, once you get the information out to people and the resources, you hope that will lead to saving lives.
Yeah, the objective is at the end to put everything together and have some type of resource available, whether that's a company or an online platform or something where people like you and I know when Seth first started going down these roads, I had no idea what to do, Angela.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shit. I
So
asked my
hard.
dad,
So
do I call the cops? Do I call a psychologist? Do I call
I
a
did all
teacher?
that.
Do I call,
I did
yeah,
all
I
of
did
that.
too. Call my neighbors. I
Yeah.
don't know. I ignored it. I overdid it.
Overdid it.
I had no idea what to do. There was just no template. And now we have all this data out there from, brain restoration research to psychedelic research to meditation to all these really innovative alternatives. I mean, obviously, if things were working and all these numbers were heading in the right direction, I probably wouldn't even be doing the tour.
Right.
But they aren't.
Well,
Everything's going in the wrong direction.
I can tell you that one thing that Emily's Hope is doing that I'm very passionate about, just like you're passionate about your RV tour, is that we are designing prevention curriculum starting in the elementary schools. In fact, we're piloting it next fall in a third grade classroom. And we've got an animated series. We are going to have a book to accompany it, because I really think if you can teach, not scare kids, but in age appropriate ways, teach kids younger about the brain and protecting their brain,
right,
and why it's so important to not introduce substances to a developing brain. I think many kids will make better choices, but I think we have to get to them way younger before they have, these cell phones and everything else, and the whole world's at their fingertips, and all of these other influences are out there. I feel very passionate about that. So that's what we're working on.
That's one thing you and I are absolutely on the same page with, because it's like a $45 billion industry. There's 15,000 rehab facilities. There's 4 million people in treatment. But what about the kids? I mean, this is all for the 35-year-old alcoholic housewife or the overstimulated, type A owner of a company that's drinking, vodkas every night. But what about the kids? And so, I developed something too, but I don't have near the, the public reception yet, but I came up with this thing called the DSI. It's called the Don't Start Initiative. And it would be a very good complement to what you're doing.
Well, we're going to have to talk more.
Acronym. Yeah. I took the acronym ABC for education for kids, make it easy to remember. A stands for awareness. So that's where the kids know that now they're in the situation that mom and dad isn't here, and they've been offered a vape. They've been offered a beer. They've been offered to skip school. So now they have to be aware that they're in that spot that their mom and dad talked about for a long time. And then they have to breathe, because through meditation, breathing's the glue. Plus, if you breathe through your nose, you can't talk. So you breathe 2 times through your nose. That buys you just enough time for your brain cells, your brain neurons to fire, to think of a way to get out of this situation. And then you choose. And I've got this picture that I drew called Walker Chalk, where I've got kids to be thinking instantaneously about the white figure on the chalk drawn with white on the cement drawn with white chalk, or you walk. So it's the awareness, you breathe, you choose, and then the rest is consequences. And like you said, anything we can do to get kids to think quickly on their feet. And I think, I agree with you. We need to show them what it does to your brains and all that. But when they're sitting there in the football game and a buddy of theirs stole a 6-pack from their dad's refrigerator, they're not going to think about all that stuff. And you and I aren't there. And they need about 10 seconds to get out of that situation, maybe 5. And so I try to think through I meditate heavily, and I try to think what's one part about meditation that's really great is that's breathing. And if you breathe through your nose, you can't talk. And so if the kid can just take 2 deep breaths, maybe that 2 seconds can save their life, because all we're trying to do is get them out of the situation. It's all we're trying to do. Get him.
I think meditation is an incredible tool as well. And it's helped me tremendously too. Well, I am just so grateful that we've connected in this way. And I'm really looking forward. You're coming to South Dakota in May. So I'm really looking forward to meeting you in person and being part of the Living Undeterred tour. We will leave all of the information for people, as I said, in the show notes. Is there anything else that you want to leave people with, Jeff?
I do. I want to remind people that you are going to be a guest on my podcast, the Living Undeterred podcast, and we're going to set that up. So I'm going to reciprocate this back, and now I'm going to put the spotlight on you to talk about your nonprofit and your passions and all that, and then we can help more people that that need to be helped. But my podcast can be found on Spotify, YouTube, all the platforms that are out there. So again, I'm honored, I'm grateful, I'm humbled like you are every day that we've been kind of picked to be in this position to help people. But at the end of the day, I mean, we are helping ourselves. I mean, what good are we to everybody else around us if you and I aren't in a good place emotionally, right?
Right. And I do believe together we are stronger. We have to join forces so that we can save lives and save families. I mean, it's such a tough problem, but we're doing what we can do in our little corners of the world, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Iowa and South Dakota are trying to make a difference.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Jeff. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for joining me for this latest edition of Grieving Out Loud. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider giving a positive review. Wishing you faith, hope, and courage.